We're going to be in 3 John tonight. 3 John. As with the previous Johns, 1 John and 2 John, we already have discussed in great detail with both of those concerning John the Apostle as being the author, with just different things about it, and whatnot. As I said, we discussed those, established those, and it's pretty much unanimous again in the same fashion that 3 John is written by John the Apostle as well. Again, we have similar wording and phrases that he says that it is very similar to 1 John, 2 John, and also the Gospel of John. And so you have a lot of things in common. So again, it's pretty easily accepted as John being one. Some of these things are, you have in, as the same as with 2 John, he is referred to as, or the writer identifies himself as the elder. It's the same thing that we saw in 2 John. And as I explained, it most likely he was referring to himself as a pastor, as an elder in that sense, or even also he could have been the elder in years compared to the other teachers very well. He was the last living apostle at this time. We also have similar wording in that he refers to Gaius and talks about others as well. We look in, if you see in verse 4 of 3 John, he says, "I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." We saw this was something that's very common in 2 John and also 1 John, talking about other believers as being children and referring to them often as well. If you look in verse 11, it says, "Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God." This verse here should sound very familiar to 2 John and also 1 John. It's a very common topic that he dealt with within it. And in reference also, if you want to look at the verse, one specific verse for this, in 1 John chapter 2, 1 John chapter 2, verse 29. Chapter 2 and 29, he says, "If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone that doeth righteousness is born of him." And then, as I said, both of the books, they really talk about this topic a lot of that those that are truly of the Lord do the things of the Lord. There's not exceptions of this. So they are to be doing this, and something that's very common with it. We see within this letter that he speaks of 3 different people within it. It's written to Gaius, a man of a church, and he writes to Gaius about 2 individuals, one specifically, and then also another in references as well, as Diotrephes and Demetrius. One of the things that we see within this is a split between characters. You have Gaius, and then also you have Demetrius, that both of them are very firm in the Lord and doing the things of the Lord, following him, walking in truth. We're given quite a bit of information about Gaius and the things that he does. And we see here that it's a very good description of what a believer is supposed to be doing. Some good quality traits. Probably the one person that people think of the most within 3 John is a man named Diotrephes, and they don't know him for good reason. Diotrephes was a man that was within the church that Gaius was at that was causing a lot of problems. Had caused some problems for John, and no doubt was causing other problems within the church, and was somebody that John intended to deal with whenever he came, but he was encouraging Gaius to not follow this man, not listen to him, but to instead listen or to do things as he's already been doing, and to also another man that was was doing good, which was Demetrius, and to listen to those things. From this, we gain two comparisons for us, and this is the way we're going to kind of be looking at this book. There's two comparisons for us to gain from here. In the question I want us to be asking as we're looking into this, as a child of Christ or as a Christian, which individual do we most identify with, or do we have the most in common? Because what we can take from this and looking at this is just the lesson for us, and to be aware of our own personal traits within our church. Whether we are one that is toxic for our church, or we are one that is profitable for the church and profitable for the kingdom of God in this. So we're going to look at this as a comparison between Diotrephes and the way that a true Christian should be walking. So let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we'll get into this. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity we have to be here tonight, to be studying your word. I thank you so much for your word and the many things that are taught to us and are established for us to follow, to learn from, Lord. I pray you would open our hearts to your word right now. Remove any distractions that there may be, that at this point in time we can be fully focused on your word and listening to its teachings and your wisdom that you have given to us, that you preserved for us, Lord. I ask you to guide and direct my words, and that everything will be for your honor, your glory, and your will. In Jesus' name, amen. You start in verse 1, it says, "The elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." We already talked about the elder here, and as we continue, he mentions that it is written to the well-beloved Gaius. The name Gaius appears 4 other times in Scripture. The other instances is in Paul's writings or with relation to Paul. We don't really know if this is the same person or not. The only real indication we have is that it may not be, simply because John refers to him in verse 4 as, or not verse 4, but the way that he is writing to this, in verse 4, when he refers to him as his child, we see of the other Gaius in Corinthians, he's mentioned as being one that Paul baptized. And so, this is really the only thing we have, and even this is a bit of suggestion that it probably may not have been the same person. Regardless, though, both individuals, or even if all of them were different Gaiuses, we see them positively in the other places in Scripture. We see him positively here as well. John refers to him as his well-beloved, or his beloved. He loves him greatly. He has a very caring relationship with him. He's very important to John. And he tells us in verse 1 that he loves him in the truth. Again, as we've seen with the previous Johns, in 1 John and 2 John, he talks about the believers loving each other and caring for each other, and the truth being what unites us together, and us to be walking in the truth together in these things. And this is the thing that he is most connected to Gaius over, is them walking in the truth, and Gaius walking in the truth as well. This what pulls them together the most. We see in verse 2, and he gives him these wishes. He says, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." When he's writing here, he's not writing to him on a first glance. You could read this and kind of get the idea that John is basically saying that the most important thing for Gaius is for him to have perfect health. to be of full health. And it's not really what he is writing here about. When you see here when he says, I wish above all things, this word above would be more accurately translated in other places. It is actually translated, and it's not actually translated above, it's translated more of about or concerning. Basically, what he's saying here for us is, I wish concerning all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health. He wants him to be healthy, and the reason is so that he can be, when it says here that he says that thou mayest prosper and be in health, and he says again, even as thy soul prospereth. This word prosper doesn't mean to be wealthy, as we think. When we talk about prosper, we often associate it most with money and being well off in money. And this word, it can be in the terms of money, being well off in that, but it actually means the idea of one's journey or their mission. Doing well in what they are trying to accomplish, or the direction that they are going in. And so here he's not talking about being wealthy and having perfect health, because we have to ask the question, what is a Christian's journey supposed to be? It's not supposed to be one of wealth. It can happen, but it's not supposed to be one of wealth. It's supposed to be one of sharing the gospel, walking in the doctrines of Christ, serving in God's kingdom. That's what the journey of every single believer is supposed to be. That is what our mission is supposed to be, carrying out the Great Commission, right? And so what John is writing to them here is that he wants him to have the health needed to be able to continue working in that journey. To continue sharing the gospel and continue doing the things that he's going to talk about after this. He even talks about here at the end, he says, even as thy soul prospereth. And this word soul is referring to the mind, not necessarily the soul that is changed after salvation, but for every believer after salvation, the desire of God is that we will grow in His knowledge and wisdom. That we will continue in that. We'll constantly gain more and more knowledge and continue in that direction. And so He wants His health and this to be able to continue with Him. That it will keep up with the direction that He's going in the Lord. Now, before we continue talking about Gaius, the first one that I want us to look at, we're going to skip over to verse 9. And we're going to talk about Diotrephes, the church member here that was causing a lot of problems within this church, and it caused problems for John as well. If you read in verse 9, he says, I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. So he talks about Diotrephes here, and this isn't a very... the things that he says about him are very concerning things for a church member. The first thing is that we see is that Diotrephes wanted to be first. He wanted to be at the center of everything. He was the most important person in his mind. This is when he says here that he loveth to have preeminence. That word preeminence means to be first. He wanted to be at the top. Everything was about him and him alone. Didn't matter what was happening. Didn't matter what everything else meant. It was about Diotrephes. is a very prideful man. We see that this character trait is so strong. Diotrephes' importance on being at the very top is so great that he rejects the letter that John sent. And something I want us to remember here with this is also talking about him rejecting the messenger that John sent as well. Because the only way a letter could be sent at that time was for John to send an individual with that lettuce, or a group of people with that lettuce, or that letter. Not lettuce. That letter. And so when these people arrived, this person arrived with the letter, Diotrephes rejected him. Because Diotrephes, it seemed as if it was there was a possibility that it could hurt his standing. That it could hurt something about him, that it could negate what he wanted. He liked to be the ruler. Diotrephes, this is something that the letter that John had written, and those that John sent, the letter itself would have been something that was very good for the church, probably. Would have had encouragements or something that needed to be corrected. And the person that John sent with it, probably more likely, would have been somebody that was good for the church as a helper as well. Those that would be entrusted with sending an important letter to another church would have been somebody that was worthy to help out as well, that John respected. And so Diotrephes, in its desire to be first, to be the very best, to get what he wanted, rejected something that would have been very good for the church. What's sad, though, is that there are people that they're in control. And if there's anything that gives even a small chance that they may lose that control, they're going to reject it. If they need to prove their control, they will reject it. This is what Diotrephes did. He was only concerned with himself. We see the way that Diotrephes accomplished this goal. If you see in verse 10, he says, "Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church." What we see here is that Diotrephes manipulated everybody else around him to accomplish his goal. We see that it said that he was prating against us with malicious words. He was saying things and spreading rumors, saying evil things of John and those that he had sent. This is somebody that was going around telling everybody else things that was not true to get the church to be against somebody that was doing good. And there are those that when they are against it, it's not enough for them just to be against it. They've got to turn everybody else against it as well. They got to make everybody else upset with that also. And they'll do it with their tongue. They'll say this. They'll say that. We see also that with his control, with those that he could not convince to reject, the messenger that John sent to reject, or to reject the messenger that John sent, it says at the end, he says, neither doth he himself receive the brethren. He wouldn't receive those brethren. He wouldn't accept them in. And he says, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. And those that didn't listen to the things that he was saying, for those that were able to see through his lies and not believe them, he said, you can't accept him. And if somebody still tried to accept them, he had them kicked out of the church. Anybody that stood up for what was right, he said, you're gone. He used his control over other people to push out those that would correct the problem, that would stand up against the problem. What we have here is some traits in a man that by themselves are very toxic traits. But within this man, he had all of these. And the sad thing is, most people that have one of these have the other two as well. They want to be first. And they'll say anything to be first. And to attack anybody that would undermine that. And of those that they cannot manipulate, they will kick out. They will push away. It seems to be a very horrible person that was here in this church, but the sad thing is there are people within the Lord's churches that are this way. And it is important for us to always make sure that we do not become that way. You know, anybody within the church can become this. Man, woman, pastor, deacon. But it is not an excuse. The sad thing is Diotrephes, some mentioned this, but Diotrephes probably had countless times that he crushed the Spirit of God within this church. All of these traits that Diotrephes had would have discouraged anybody that was following the Lord from being a part of the church. And anybody that was in the church and following the Lord, it would have discouraged them from staying. At least discouraged them from opening their mouths for anything. Would have very easily caused many, many problems. You know, it's sad that there are those that will become on fire for the Lord. One would be, will rededicate their life to God, or somebody will get saved. And their excitement, they will want to do things. They will want to serve the Lord, and someone that is very similar to Diotrephes will come along and quench it. Put it in. Someone will take on a characteristic of Diotrephes, and it's gone. John in verse 11 says, Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, and he that doeth evil hath not seen God. He makes a statement about Diotrephes and says, this man is not following God. He's not doing the things of God. It's not of God. Do not follow him. Do not listen to the things that he says. Do not do the things that he wants. Leave him. Follow the one that does the good things. Listen to the one that does what is good, because the one that does good is of God. He's following God's will. And he's the one you need to be listening to. If you look, as we continue, verse 12, he mentions one that is good. In verse 12 he says, Demetrius hath good report of all men, and of all truth itself. Yea, and we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. He doesn't mention a lot about Demetrius, but he says some very amazing things about him. The first thing he says to them is that Demetrius has a good report of all men. This man and the things that he did, the life that he lived, may cause him to have a good report, not of just believers, but of all men. Everyone knew that this is a good man. That this is somebody that does good things. This means that the things that he did and the frequency at which he did them was so great that nobody didn't know the character of him. Everyone knew his character because they had experienced it multiple times. They had seen it multiple times. And so he has a good report of all men. And notice this as he continues, it says, and of the truth itself. He doesn't just have a good report of men, he has a good report of the truth, or God's Word. He aligns the things that he does isn't just defined good by men, but it is defined as good by God himself. You know, it is possible to be called of good report by men, but not God. But to be considered good by both. To have the things that you're doing considered good by both is a very great accomplishment. He aligned on both counts. And he continues and says, and yea, and we also bear record. You know, it says we bear record of this. We know it to be true as well. We have experienced it. We know it. And he says, and you know that our record is true. And he says, and Gaius, you know this also. You've seen it. You know what it does. So follow him. Listen to the things that he has to say. It is important for us to have this good report, not only of men, but more importantly also of the truth of God's Word. It needs to be a goal that we have, that everyone knows what kind of person we are and that it is a good reputation. And it is a well-known reputation. You know, there are many Christians that it would be kind of hard to know their reputation. And some probably have two different reputations. One of the Christians and one of the world. And when compared to Scripture, reputation falls apart as well. I want us to also, though, look at the reputation of Gaius. John gives us more detail of him. If you look in verse 3, John starts, he says, for I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. First thing that we see of Gaius is that he walked in the truth. He did not speak the truth only. In order to walk in the truth, you have to speak the truth. But there are those that they speak the truth, but they don't walk in the truth. And Gaius walked in the truth. He lived the truth. He lived the Word of God. And he walked in it so much and so well that others made mention of it. John had heard of it from them. Word had traveled of it. And remember, this isn't the time of Facebook and cell phones or even phones. This is word of mouth travel. And John had heard it. What this means for us is that walking in the truth was a big part of Gaius' life. It was very important to him. And when we see of John, as he says, he rejoiced greatly. And then in verse 4 it tells us, there is no greater joy than to hear this. John was excited for this condition of Gaius, to hear these things of him. He jumped for joy with him. Now, I can't help but think of how maybe Diotrephes would have responded to this kind of news. Somebody else doing good things, of accomplishing the right things, he probably would have been upset. He probably would have tried to get people to stop talking about Gaius. But yet, as an example for us, with John, we see excitement and joy. To hear somebody else doing good. You continue, verse 5, he says, Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers. What I see here is that Gaius, again, more indication to us that he wasn't a talker, he was a doer. Because he tells us here that he doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest. And here, in our King James, it gives us the same word for doest in both places. In English, it's doest, but when you look into the Greek, it's actually two different words. The first one means to make something happen, and the second one means to toil. Which basically means for us is that Gaius put in the effort to make things happen, and he didn't care how much effort it required. He would toil at it and figure out what needed to be done to get it accomplished. It wasn't about things of convenience or ease. It wasn't things that just plopped into his lap. These were things that he had to work for. He had to look for. Things that probably most of the time was not convenient. They required sacrifice. Gaius did the hard things. I want us to see also that of these things, it says that he did it not only to the brethren, but it says and also to the strangers. Gaius did what was needed, no matter who it was that he needed to be doing it for. You know, there are those that will go to great lengths for certain people. They'll bend over backwards to try and find something that they can do for an individual. But for a stranger, I won't even look twice. What we see in Gaius is that no matter who it was, whatever was needed, whatever he could do, he did. He wasn't a respecter of persons. Now, there's some people it's easy to do things, but others not so much. Not so simple. As we continue, verses 6 and 7, he says, Which have borne witness of thy charity before the church, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well. Because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles. John speaks of a group of people that bore witness of these things, that testified of who Gaius was, and his hospitality. The group that John is talking about here is those that were on a journey of serving the Lord. And it indicates to us here that they were doing it to reach Gentiles. They were trying to reach lost people with the gospel. And they didn't receive any help from those that they were ministering to. And so it was important for Gaius to help them on their journey and in their work. To be the one to help them, to accept them and be hospitable to them. So Gaius opened up his home for them. Oh, again, this is you can't help compare this to Diotrephes and his rejection of being hospitable to people working for the Lord. And to make sure that nobody else was hospitable. But yet you see in the case of Gaius that he opened up his home. These men may have even stayed for an extended period of time. It was not a one-night kind of thing. He was ready for it. He wanted to do it. In verse 8 he says, we therefore ought to receive such, that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. And he says, John says of him that we should want to do this. We should want to help those that are on these journeys for the Lord, these missionaries. We should want to help them so we can help them in spreading the truth. You know, there are many that are willing to support a missionary with voice or with even money. But there are few that are willing to sacrifice themselves to help them. Whether in being hospitable or even going with and helping them. Being a fellow laborer, fellow helper. But here for Gaius, he is the example for us to help them. To do whatever we can to increase their effectiveness and take care of their needs. From Gaius, and looking at his life, and I would think that John is very brief here with the things that he talks about with Gaius, but Gaius is an example for us in the way to live. In the way that we should be. He is the opposite of Diotrephes. In his heart, his attitude, his lifestyle. Diotrephes was a very worldly man. Very prideful man, very arrogant and malicious. And Gaius was focused on the Lord. He walked in the truth. He was very humble, and he was willing to sacrifice his needs above others. He was very loving and caring. He encouraged people in serving God. The question has to be, are you a Gaius or a Demetrius? Or are you a Diotrephes? Do you have tendencies of Diotrephes? Things you do, things you say, that are not encouraging to God's people, but are discouraging or hurtful. You know, there are many that have been hurt by people in churches. I don't know every circumstance, but I know that there are a lot that were because of somebody being Diotrephes. And it's sad. Because God's people, believers, are supposed to be like Gaius. Caring, helpful, walking in the truth. John gives his closing statements, verse 13. He says, I have many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. But I trust I shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. Peace be to thee. Our friends salute thee. Greet the friends by name. In verse 10, John had already mentioned that he intended to try and come to be able to deal with Diotrephes and other things as well. He even tells us here that there were many things that he wanted to write, but he decided to just save those for whenever he is able to come, face to face. Until then, he wished the best for Gaius, wants him to continue following the Lord, seeking God, and to have the peace in the things that he's doing. You know, it's for us to remember to always be aware of our effect on other people. To always be aware of our attitude. Sometimes we may fall into the trap of thinking that we are only affecting ourselves with the decisions that we make, the way that we live. But that is not the case. Whether you're willing to admit it or not, you affect those that are around you. Even if you think that you're gaining something from it, you are losing something. And you are causing everyone else to lose something as well. Throughout history, there are many Gaiuses and there are many Diotrephes. It only takes one of each. It only takes one Diotrephes to ruin a church. And there's even times where it only takes one Gaius to bring a church to life. So the question we have to ask is, which one are we? And I think a better question we have to ask is, are you of the world? Are you Diotrephes, or are you